For generations, the Ascensor da Glória had been woven into the rhythm of Lisbon itself. Every day it carried office workers home through the fading light, elderly residents spared from the punishing climb, and tourists drawn in by the novelty of riding a machine older than most of the city around it. The journey was brief, familiar, and so dependable that passengers rarely gave it a second thought once the doors had closed and the car began its slow ascent or descent. That sense of routine is what made the events that followed so shocking. There were no warning signs that evening, and no reason for passengers to feel uneasy. The funicular's long history had created an expectation of safety, and familiarity led people to believe the journey carried little risk. Yet within minutes, a trip that would have been made thousands of times before would become one of the darkest nights in the city's recent memory. First placed into service in 1885, the Ascensor da Glória is a funicular railway, a system designed specifically to operate on slopes too steep for ordinary rail transport. Unlike conventional trains, funiculars rely on two cars that are permanently linked by a thick steel cable. As one car climbs the hill, the other descends, and the weight of each car counterbalances the other throughout the journey. This shared load reduces strain on the motor and allows the cars to move at a controlled, steady pace, even on severe gradients where normal traction would fail. In practical terms, this means the cable is far more than a simple connector. It is the central element that keeps the entire system in equilibrium. As long as the cable holds, the forces remain balanced and the descent stays controlled. If that cable fails, the balance is lost and gravity immediately takes control. At 6:04 p.m. on September 3, 2025, during the evening rush hour, the downhill car departed from Bairro Alto carrying a full load of passengers. Some were Lisbon residents heading home after work, while others were visitors finishing a day of sightseeing. According to witness accounts, the descent began normally with no unusual sounds or movements during the first moments of the journey. At the moment the failure occurred, Car 2, which was ascending from the lower station, suddenly jolted and was brought to an abrupt stop. Witnesses report that the carriage struck the pavement with enough force to throw passengers forward inside the cabin. Bystanders immediately rushed to help those who were injured inside the now stationary car and attempted to assist passengers in getting out. At the same time, Car 1, which was descending from the upper station, lost control, derailed and crashed into a building near the bottom of the slope, destroying the carriage on impact. The crash occurred on the bend along Calçada da Glória, close to Avenida da Liberdade. One person on the sidewalk was reported to have been struck by the carriage as it overturned. Investigators later confirmed that the entire sequence of events unfolded in less than 50 seconds. It was only then that the full scale of the disaster became apparent. Survivors from Car 1 later described hearing a sharp metallic sound moments before the crash, followed by a violent jolt and the terrifying realization that the car was accelerating downhill far faster than it should have been. Within seconds, the controlled descent had turned into an uncontrollable runaway. Inside the cabin, passengers were thrown off balance as the car gathered speed. Panic spread as the people realized the funicular was no longer behaving as it should. The operator repeatedly attempted to activate the emergency braking systems, but the car continued to accelerate, indicating that the fundamental counterbalancing mechanism had already failed. Investigators later reported that the steel cable connecting the two cars had either snapped or detached, removing the resistance that normally keeps both carriages under control. Without that counterweight, the descending car effectively became a runaway vehicle on a steep urban slope. As the funicular approached the lower section of the track, it entered a curve that had been designed for slow, controlled movement. At excessive speed, the curve became deadly. The car derailed and crashed violently near the base of the line, colliding with surrounding structures and collapsing inward under the force of the impact. Emergency services were alerted within moments of the crash, and firefighters, police officers and medical teams converged on Calçada da Glória to find a scene of widespread destruction. The funicular carriage had been torn open by the impact, its structure badly distorted, and several passengers were trapped inside the twisted metal. Fire crews were forced to use cutting equipment to breach the wreckage and reach those still inside, working carefully to avoid further injury. As the rescue continued, paramedics treated the wounded at the scene, while others were carried to waiting ambulances, and teams worked under intense pressure to free survivors and stabilise the most seriously injured. The human toll was devastating. The crash killed 16 people and injured 23 others, including 5 who were left in critical condition, while many more suffered injuries ranging from fractures to life-threatening trauma. Many of the victims were tourists, far from home, who had boarded the Funicular believing it was one of the safest and most routine experiences Lisbon had to offer. A national day of mourning was observed across Portugal on the 4th of September, while Lisbon declared 3 days of municipal mourning. The country's president, Prime Minister and the Mayor of Lisbon attended a memorial mass together, standing publicly in tribute to the victims and their families. Portugal's Prime Minister, Luís Montenegro, has promised a swift and thorough investigation to determine the cause of the accident, describing the incident as one of the biggest tragedies in our recent history. As Lisbon entered a period of mourning, investigators began examining how a transport system that had operated for nearly 140 years could suffer such a catastrophic failure. The head of the city's public transport operator, Caris, announced that all of Lisbon's funicular railways were being inspected and that an independent investigation had been launched to determine the cause of the accident and whether similar risks existed elsewhere in the network. Caris also confirmed that one of its employees, a brake operator named André Jorge Gonçalves Marques, had died in the crash, describing him as a dedicated, kind and cheerful professional who was always willing to contribute to the greater good. Attention quickly focused on the cable itself. According to reports cited during the investigation, the cable installed on the funicular was not certified for use in carrying human passengers. Instead, it was allegedly rated for industrial or mechanical applications rather than continuous passenger transport. If accurate, this finding raised profound questions about procurement decisions, safety standards, and oversight. Further reports suggested that the cable showed signs of wear inconsistent with its intended use, and that its specification may not have met the demands of a heavily used public transport system, operating daily under modern loads. While maintenance inspections had reportedly been carried out, investigators questioned whether those inspections were capable of identifying deeper structural or specification flaws. This raised a broader issue shared by many historic transport systems. Heritage infrastructure often occupies a regulatory grey area, where responsibility is divided between municipal operators, private maintenance contractors, and safety authorities whose standards were written for modern rail systems. In such environments, accountability can become diluted and critical risks can remain unaddressed for years. In response to the disaster, similar systems were suspended for inspection and public confidence in Lisbon's historic transport network was shaken. What had once been seen as charming and dependable was now viewed through the lens of vulnerability and loss. The Ascensor da Glória disaster was not simply a mechanical failure. It was a human tragedy shaped by trust in familiarity and by assumptions that longevity equals safety, and by the quiet risks that accumulate when ageing systems are asked to meet modern demands without modern safeguards. For the victims and their families, the journey ended far too soon. For the rest of us, the disaster serves as a reminder that infrastructure does not become safe through tradition alone. It becomes safe through vigilance, accountability, and a willingness to question even the most familiar machines. This particular machine was trusted for generations, and it failed in a single moment. Quite obviously, this is a very tragic tale. Our condolences go out to the families of the people who lost their lives, and our best wishes go out to the people who were injured, wishing them a speedy recovery. Now, despite the nature of the content, I hope you like the way it was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll wish you bye-bye for now.